Hello again, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Terminal Vocation. I'm your host, Deacon Mark.
And I'm Erin.
And we're excited to have you back with us today. We're going to be talking about this is episode 2 of our 5-part series on different challenges that couples have. Things that need to be discussed before getting engaged, before getting married. That list, just as a reminder, is money, kids, sex, family of origin, and religion/politics. So if you're interested in starting from the beginning of our series, we recorded and posted our episode Money, Money, Money last week. So go back and listen to that. Though it's not really a serial. I think you could pretty easily jump in anywhere and go back and listen later. So,
yes.
So maybe just stay with us here for fear that you get lost on your way back and forget to drop breadcrumbs or some such nonsense. So, but before we get into that, how was your week?
It's been so nice. Crazy weather that we had here, lots of rain. But it's nice having 3 of our kids home, and we saw some family this past weekend, Memorial Day weekend, which was great.
Yeah.
So I thought that was good.
Yeah, Memorial Day weekend was nice. Got a little bit of time off.
Yes.
It was good. A little bit of, we had a friend over, one of the priests in our parish, as you know, is transferring, and so we were able to have a little dinner with him and some goodbyes. He's going to be here for another month, but some of our kids are leaving and wanted to have him over for dinner. So it was a nice night, but
yes.
Bittersweet.
Yes.
So those changes are always hard, but
somewhat
necessary.
predictable.
Somewhat predictable. Yeah. So a good week overall. Well, before we jump into talking about today's topic, which is kids, incidentally, episode 2, kids were some of the ways that kids become challenges in our lives, and what are some things we need to talk about. But this just ripped from 1988 or whenever this was on. I remember I mentioned a couple episodes that I often speak in SNL sketches.
Yes, it's true.
And there was a story this week, ripped right out of that. The All-Drug Olympics, as it was called back in the SNL days. But there was a one-day event this weekend called the Enhanced Games.
Why not? If you can be better.
Why not?
Why not?
So no restrictions on the types of performance-enhancing drugs that competitors can use.
Was anyone bionic?
That's interesting. I didn't. What sort of I didn't read the full list of how much of an enhancement
it was open for everything, it seemed.
Right. So if I had some sort of prosthetic motorized wheel instead of legs, could I compete that way? So what's the tie-in for us? Why do we care? We'd like to talk about marriage and family here and to try and relate this, but I think this kind of points to the kind of exhaustion that the discipline or really just kind of having standards can be, right? Because once you have a rule, and I remember this when we had, our kids would go through this cycle where every couple months, a relatively good kid would start to push the boundaries.
Yes.
And as we sort of, term it, would be them asking, does this rule still exist? Does this rule still apply? Mm-hmm. And if you're not consistent with it, if you don't show them, yes, the wall is still there, mm-hmm. then, they're going to continue to push and push and push.
Yeah, well, because then you can push that one down, then what's the next one to follow?
What's the next one? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this reminded me a lot of sort of that mentality that we saw as our kids got older, where there's always at least one, maybe more than one, family that's so the kids are 16, 17, 18, and we're going to have a party and we're going to serve them alcohol because they'll drink anyway, and we'll just take their keys and we'll manage their drinking, their underage drinking at our house. And this reading about this Olympics, this event that they could be drugged, that athletes could be drugged, I thought, wow, we've just succumbed to this rule. Well, if it's better, we should let them do it, because think how fast you can run when you're on XYZ, Right. And, although the legitimate athletic authorities aren't
really even commenting on it or giving it any credence. The fear, of course, is the slippery slope kind of argument, right? You know,
Sure.
sort of the nose under the camel's tent or whatever analogy you want to use. But yeah, I think you're right with that analogy in terms of, you know, parents and kids. Like, we'll just give in, or we'll just let it happen, or we'll just have this illusion of control around it. And I think, you know, one of the questions for the games is that good for those athletes? Right? Well, they don't care because it's a spectacle and it makes money, you know. And I think sometimes the fear is that some parents don't really think about, is it good for the kids? Or they only think of, is it good for our relationship right now? Do I look like a buddy? Do I look like a pal?
Right.
Regardless of whether this has potentially disastrous consequences for that kid's relationship with alcohol, authority, rules, etc. later on.
Right, absolutely. Well, and I thought it was interesting that in the article that you posted, Curly, I think is his last name.
Yes.
He was not drugging, but running.
But compete, yeah. So it's like the kid who says, "Mom, I'm not going to drink, but I'm still going to go to the party."
That's what I thought of. I mean, not that I'm doubting his word, but yeah, I had to read it twice.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting about that, because I read that too, and I thought, well, most of your legitimate athletes right now probably aren't going to risk their status in the overall athletic community by participating. So you're really going to get, I'm not trying to criticize any of these athletes, right? I'm going to call them second-rate athletes. I'm 10th or 13th or 100th rate athlete, you know, by comparison. But it's likely people who say, well, I can't compete at the Olympics, at the World Championships or whatever. So I'll do this and enhance myself. And so I think what he's thinking is, I can still compete with these lower tiered enhanced athletes without enhancement. Good for him. Maybe he can. I didn't see the results. We'll have to look up and see if Curly won or not. But the danger there, of course, is, you know, a guilt by association, you know, getting painted with that brush. I would not let my kid, even if he says he's not going to drink, go to the party where alcohol is going to be served for all of those same reasons.
Sure.
You know, why do you want to spend time with the people who are breaking the rules?
Right.
That's not really a crowd that I want you to spend that much time with.
Right. And I think we can get into this whole thing of, well, the rule's dumb, so you can break it. But I find that subverts authority in general. Maybe you work to change the law. Maybe you know, I don't know.
Sure.
I'm sure there's rules that I think are dumb that I've broken. Of course, I can't think of any right now. But there is something problematic about it. Like, we do have, you know, then am I allowed to say, well, it's only 45 here on this street, but I can clearly do 80 on it. You know, like, where are these lines? I don't know. So, it was interesting.
And I always thought, it's okay if my kids are a little bit square.
Yeah.
That sounds demeaning towards people who follow the rules. I don't mean it that way, but they don't have to have the latest whiz-bang tech gizmo. They don't need to go to all those parties. You know, there's... and most of our kids, you know, had a group of friends who also didn't want to do those things. They found crowds to run with. They had, you know, good relationships with other people at their schools. I don't think it really kept them from...
Yeah, it was a different group of kids for them.
Yeah.
We also...
And they hated high school just as much as we did.
Definitely people bloom later sometimes. It did crack me up because our son had a friend who tended to have the whiz-bang technology. And that was great when they were in middle school, because it delayed us needing to get our son a phone. Because as long as he was hanging out with his friend, we could find him.
Yeah.
That brings up a whole other can of worms about, well, then there's a phone around, and I know that's problematic too.
Yeah.
But anyway, different topic. So
anyway, that's, you know, the enhanced game. So, you know, encourage you to not check it out and to not give it any more oxygen.
But you should go look up the SNL.
But you should look up the SNL skit because it's dreadfully funny, and a weightlifter pulling his arms off after being on anabolic, metabolic, and some sort of fish paralyzer. It was just a great line, and Phil Hartman standing there with blood gushing out of his shoulders and not screaming in pain because he was so numb
medicated.
Everything.
Oh, goodness.
So a great bit, unfortunately coming to fruition. So, it's an interesting segue because we've been talking a little bit about, kids and raising them. We're going to continue talking about kids, but maybe with a little bit different lens. So in this series, we've kind of been talking more about what are the conversations that we need to be having while we're dating, while we're engaged, early stages of marriage, to kind of say, okay, what are the problems that surface with respect to these issues or these categories, right? So, and there's no shortage of that with kids because we come to relationships, we come to marriage with different upbringings, with different attitudes, with different thoughts about the kind of family that we're both from and want to have, and so we're going to talk about kind of what are the things to evaluate. And early on, I think, again, like last week with money, we'll kind of start talking about in the dating phase, what are the kind of conversations that need to happen? How do those extend into engagement and kind of reaching some greater level of agreement or harmony on those before walking down the aisle? And then how do these things surface in early marriage? So early on, I think you mentioned last week, right? A lot of these things kind of run in a progression, right? You don't start with the intense questions at the first date. How many children do you want?
That would be freaky.
So, obviously these things have to come naturally to some degree. But you have to kind of meet some kind of milestones along that path. So I think one of the easiest ways to kind of start, and it probably does happen in that first date, is just getting to know, who are you? Where are you from? How many brothers and sisters do you have? So just from someone's family size, we start to gauge a little bit. Maybe some of it's more assumption-based, but we get some sense of the family that they came from, at least.
Well, I think, too, you get some sense of how people talk about their families. I mean, we tell a lot about what we say and don't say, and who in your family maybe you have difficult relationships with, or who you're closest to, or were you a latchkey kid? That was the big term when we were growing up, of kids that you had a key to let yourself in because your parents both worked, and so that kind of, for 80s kids, that evokes, I was home alone a lot in the afternoon until my mom came home, until my dad came home, this type of thing. So there's just some code words that come up in conversation. Or if someone doesn't speak about a parent, what's going on there? Did the parent die? Are they disagreeing with this person? Actively in some kind of disagreement? So what's said, what's unsaid?
Yeah. And I know for some of those strained relationships, they early on, they'd be, I don't really know my dad too much, or we're not close, and you might gauge, on that first date, okay, that's a third rail at this point.
Right.
We'll
talk about that later, maybe.
But at some point, that rail needs to not be electric anymore. Correct. And you need to be able to have that conversation, right? So, okay, so at some point, and I would say probably before engagement, and I'm going to push on some of these as being kind of pre-engagement, because I think once you get engaged, you do get that marriage, wedding inertia thing. And so I think there's some things you kind of need to have ironed out, or at least have some sense of. So I think there should be some discussion about three big aspects of having kids. The first would be how many. And I think with this, my concern or is how specific is the person? There should be a generalities here. I think when we were talking, I was always a 2, maybe 3. I think you were 3, maybe 4. So there was kind of a little bit of a vagary around it.
Sure.
And fortunately, we both had a common intersection, so
Right.
so it was always possible to be like, okay,
We're in the ballpark.
we'll be on the high side of mine and the low side of hers, but that's fine. We'll meet in the middle. But I think the person who's dead set on, well, we're going to have 5, and we're going to have 3 boys and 2 girls, and these are going to be their names. Like, ooh,
That's a little right. That's a little unnerving.
a little bit. And it's fine to. There's a way of talking about that is, when I was little, I always dreamed of ...
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're locked in on a very certain number or something like that, it can be a little unsettling.
I think when things have to look a certain way to be right.
Yeah.
Because then where does God have a chance to enter into that?
Yeah.
If you've already decided that
Yeah.
this is the perfect family, and then what if you don't get that many kids? What if you get more than that many, that many
Right.
kids, right?
And the odds are, if someone is that controlling around that, you've probably seen that control rear its head in other areas of conversation. So, but I think having some sense of, I'm from a big family, I want a big family. I'm from a big family, I might like a little bit smaller family, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
Or certainly if someone says, I don't want kids at all, that's
right.
And we've got some strong beliefs on our side as far as what is marriage for.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's certainly a conversation that needs to be had around the faith side of things too. Is it's one of the reasons. So
yeah, that should never be a surprise that you find out on your honeymoon or after.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I don't want kids.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. The second sort of big thing that I think should come up is how to parent or discipline. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of broadly speaking, because I think no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Oh.
Like, we all have ideas of how we want to parent and discipline our kids, and then we have one in front of us asking for something at the checkout aisle, like we were talking about a couple weeks ago. Like, and all of a sudden, I never thought. How many times have we uttered something like, I never thought those words would come out of my mouth? So,
right.
So, but I think having an idea. How were you raised? How were you disciplined? Did you like that? Not like that? Did you think it was effective? Not effective? Probably discipline nobody liked the discipline they received, but they might have, seen it's good.
Hopefully, Hopefully, by the time you're getting married, you realize what your parents were doing or not doing. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? But, and I think again, so many of these things have come down to it's having the conversation that matters more than the opinions at some point. I mean, obviously, you need to make sure they're in the same ballpark, right? We've said that. But somebody that you can talk with about things that worked in their childhood and didn't work in their childhood, what you think should happen, and that you can amicably disagree. You can find a way to work together.
Yeah.
You trust that he sees, that we always, use corporal punishment, and she says, no, we never. How do you square those things together? Do you have somebody you can work on these issues with?
Yeah, I think there's 2 big extremes that can be a problem here. You mentioned like corporal punishment, and heaven forbid someone has been a victim of any sort of child abuse, right? I think that's a good thing to know, and a good thing to have a conversation about, because generally anybody who's been through that, God bless them.
Right.
They don't want to repeat that, but sometimes end up doing it because it's kind of what they were taught, or what kind of, so having a conversation about, how did you work through that? What did you do to overcome that, and kind of figuring out how they've structured their lives or made plans or accommodations to overcome and transcend that problem.
Because I think once you're married, and then once you have kids, certain situations happen, arguments, disagreements, having to discipline, and all of a sudden I would find myself, not in the current moment, but battling out something that happened to me as a kid, and not even in a traumatic way, but This is how we dealt with it in my family. This issue meant this consequence.
Right.
And especially if you want to do something different than your parents did, or you have a child that is not at all like you and doesn't respond to that discipline, being able to pull yourself out of that regression and stay in the present is so important. So can your partner, can your fiance do that? Or, do you think?
I think the other extreme of that, and this kind of goes along with what you were talking about and sort of this just in about, the parents who throw drinking parties and stuff like that, is the parent who doesn't want to discipline ever at all, wants to be their child's best friend. And if someone has grown up in that kind of environment, then what's their take? What do they see as good or effective? Maybe they say, gosh, I really feel like in hindsight it was overly permissive and I would be much more strict. Oh, okay, red flag. What does more strict look like? Or that was great, because my dad is my best friend. Okay.
It also goes back, we've talked about past stereotypes, but it goes back to the mom sometimes saying, well, wait till your father gets home. So mom's not going to handle the discipline. Mom's going to wait till dad walks in the door and pass on this situation that he has no idea about. And then the dad's always the bad guy, or vice versa. I mean, it can happen both ways, where one parent is the bad guy and one is the friend. We'll
touch on that even more, I think, when we get married and talk about that idea of having that united front.
Yeah,
and the importance of that. This last kind of thing that I think is a pre-engagement item, how to educate and pass on the faith. Mm-hmm. And I think, especially passing on a faith, if you're a person of faith, that should be a really important topic that's coming up. And we'll talk about religion and politics later on, but figuring out how we're going to pass that on to the kids. Mm-hmm. And if one person is dead set that we have to have the kids baptized and they're going to go to catechism class and they're going to do this and this and that, and the other person is against that,
sure,
that's going to create really double the challenge, right? Then you get a disagreement on your faith life and on raising kids. You get these two obstacles or these two challenges that kind of overlap. And so I think that's a conversation that needs to happen. It's like, well, I'm of this faith, and we as Catholics, right? If you're going to get married in the Catholic Church, you have to agree to raise the kids in the Catholic faith, and the non-Catholic spouse has to agree to that.
Sure.
And not obstruct it. So that's a conversation that should happen before you're getting engaged, because like I said, once you get engaged, you're going to start to make concessions sometimes, and wedding inertia, like I said, can sometimes get in the way of that.
Yeah, definitely an important conversation.
And then the education too, like just around how were you raised? Private school, public school, parochial school, homeschool.
Right.
If you haven't talked about this, and one person is just assuming that it's going to go a certain way. And
it's funny what we get attached to, because that was our experience, and we want our kids sometimes to have the experiences we did. But your spouse has different experiences that they might also like your kids to see and live through. The other thing I will say is that sometimes, having these conversations and learning about someone as you're engaged, having some of these ideas as, I don't even want to say a plan, because you're not engaged, you're just engaged, but realizing we'll consider a lot of these things, and then as life goes on, we'll change that plan accordingly. But I think having some structure, having some idea, it's kind of like walking in a really big gate, and then as you approach marriage, that gate is narrowing, and we're setting some things aside. We're not going to do that. Or then you actually have the kids, and some of those plans go out the window, as we saw. Like we thought we were going to do cloth diapers. That did not work for us in the beginning, right? Right? So you have these great plans about how we're going to save the environment, and I was all Pampers all the time, baby.
That did change quickly.
Oh dear. But having the plan then gives you somewhere to step off from that to a different plan.
Yeah, and then sometimes figuring out, okay, well, does the failure of that plan mean you're going back to what the other person had wanted as plan B? Or were you always that plan B was a non-negotiable no? Then you think there's some sort of plan C that needs to be found.
Right, I'm not doing what you want. what's the third option?
Right.
Right.
Right. But if the other person thinks, okay, what you wanted didn't work, so now we get to do what I wanted.
Yeah.
So
Conversation.
We kind of need to have those things kind of figured out, and so a plan is good. Having a flexible plan is even better.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So we've talked about these three things. We've come to agreement. Everything's fine. So we get the engagement, and we're starting some marriage prep. What are the things that now, like, okay, we need to drill down a little bit more, right? We need to have a little bit deeper conversations. And so a large part of this is going to depend on how many of these things you drilled down into before. I mean, if those three were sort of a minimum gate, you might have gone into some of these a little bit further.
Sure.
But there's some more specifics that come up here. So number one, how soon do we want to have kids? Mm-hmm. This is a tough one to answer, because I think a lot of people feel like, well, when we're ready. Dear listener, you're never ready for the absolute shock and awe that is the hospital saying that you're allowed to take that screaming bundle of joy home with you.
And no nurse is coming home with you. You're just those silly people.
They let us drive over
to
them.
us.
But I do think that the how soon can be especially tricky if you start to fall into the like, well, we want to be able to do these things, or we want to wait until we have this much money, or have gone on these trips, and all these other things. And again, we're coming from a place of deep belief in some of the Catholic Church's teachings, but we do think that there's a way that we're cooperating with God in the creation of these beings. And so when we try and wrestle too much of that control, we have a way of being sorely disappointed.
Or shockingly surprised.
Right.
Like again, having a plan and making God laugh. But I mean, we never expected to have twins, and God was like, guess what? Yeah. Yeah. Side note, right, so we have 4, so you won. I thought we were doing the 2, maybe 3, and we got pregnant that third time, and it was 3 and 4. So yes.
Good job.
My prayers were answered.
But I do think that, how soon is definitely something that needs to be talked about. And there's reasons, even the church would say there might be grave reasons why you might, wait. So having those conversations between each other about, what's grave and why are we waiting?
And then you just readjust if things change.
The next one is really important, and I push this with couples that I'm preparing, is how we deal with potentially an inability to have kids. Infertility is, it's hard.
Yeah.
And we've talked to couples. You've talked to couples with me, that I'm counseling who are struggling with infertility. And man, that's a cross.
And we had some minor taste of this in that we had a miscarriage before we had children.
Right.
And then we had 2 kids and we had another miscarriage. And so I think especially the first one for me was really hard, because I just thought, oh my gosh, is this the beginning of just, we're never going to get what I feel like is on my heart. And, you said was on your heart was to have kids. And so just, again, trying to be open to God's plan of, okay, does it look different? Are we called to do something else? Are we called to adopt? Or, what does that look like? But it is, that was a big struggle for me in particular. And again, when our plans don't line up with God's in any aspect of life, it's very challenging.
Yeah. That was a hard thing to deal with. I remember you calling after the appointment, because you had gone to one of the early OB appointments by yourself, and calling, understandably inconsolable because of the news that you had just heard. And then it was harder for you for longer.
Yes.
I think, because the degree of personal, I mean, you were carrying the child, right? So you had this sense of culpability that, wasn't true, but was understandable.
Yeah, I just kept thinking, what did I do? And it didn't matter how much the doctor said, this was nothing you did. Like, sometimes things just don't work that way, but yeah, there was a physical recovery, definitely kind of a mental recovery, and then I think a spiritual aspect to that too, of just trying to surrender. I don't know that I could do that right in that moment. I think that came later. But yeah, it definitely took me longer to deal with that loss.
Yeah, and probably until we had kids.
Yeah, I mean, certainly
to some degree.
Part of it, you're just always worried.
Yeah.
Then where I was sort of blissfully ignorant before.
So I think talking about that, during engagement and just understanding that this happens to a percentage of people, and you need to be prepared that although having and educating children is one of the reasons for marriage, that it does happen to a certain percentage that they can't, and you need, this other person needs to be enough for you. So,
and whatever God's mission is, then, how do you discern what's next?
Next thing is, how do we want to handle jobs, childcare, and school kind of as they relate to having kids, right? So, is someone going to stay home, with kids? Is someone going to, maybe are we both going to work, and maybe we'll pay for daycare when it's just one kid, but then when that doubles with the second one, maybe, so kind of looking at, what that means and what you want, and having some agreement to it.
I think that's a tough one too, when one person's, anything, when one person's on one page and another person's on a different one, and living in an expensive area where it can be really difficult to live on one income. So, trying to make sure that you're looking at all of the aspects of raising kids. And I don't mean that you're going to solve it all, have enough money, have the perfect home, all that stuff, but that you've considered, gosh, we really do both need to work in here. So in this community, we can't afford it. So what does that look like for our kids? Or we're actually going to move somewhere where one of us can stay home, whatever it looks like. But having those more, I would say, nitty-gritty conversations.
Yeah. Next one is, how involved do we want our own parents to be? And how do we keep sort of our nuclear family our own while still, not alienating our extended families? You and I both had grandparents that were far away
when we were little.
when we were little.
Yeah.
And so we never saw grandparents involved, in any kind of childcare on a recurring basis. And none of our parents were really interested in playing a part in it either.
They were still working.
Which was good and fine. I don't think, we really, wanted it or cared for it. But that's, something that some parents or some new grandparents think that they're going to be very involved. And so kind of figuring out what is the role for grandparents? How do we want them to be involved, if at all, in that? It's important because the more we let anybody be involved in our family, the more influence they have, the harder it is sometimes to maintain control as a couple.
And some of that we probably don't want to control. It goes back to letting go, right? There is something to learning how different families operate. I think our kids were very young when they saw differences in our parents just when they went to their houses or visited. And those are great differences, right? We get to bake a pie with grandpa, because they would always do that at my dad's. They would go to your mom's and there would be sewing projects, or, they often spent the night at your mom's because she had extra beds for them.
Yeah.
My mom would come in and visit, and she would drive them to preschool. And, so letting those grandparents find those different roles, and I think realizing that they are grandparenting. They're not parenting. So maybe they go to your mom's and they get to have cake, or probably my dad. They went to my dad's and got to have dessert first. That was his big thing. Okay, dessert fine. First. Yeah. You get to do that at Grandpa's. You don't get to do that at our house.
Yeah, and then just helping the kids understand that that's not that the rules have changed, is that the rules there are different.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay, the last thing in terms of that I think needs to be talked about during engagement, and this is a question that comes up in some of the focus inventory during pre-Cana, and it can sometimes surprise couples. How do we maintain our sense of each other while parenting? Date nights and our relationship will be one of the biggest success factors to our kids having a healthy view of marriage and relationships of their own. And so there's a question of focus that is something like, I'm giving people a cheat code now.
Do they know what the focus is?
The focus inventory is a survey that's done by couples who are getting married in the church, and so it asks them questions, and we compare the bride's answer to the groom's answer to just kind of provide points for discussion. Hey, it looks like there's a little disagreement here. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's not that there's a right answer or a wrong necessarily. It's that you're trying to understand the couples together for the most part.
We're just trying to generate conversation about important topics. Yeah, and in this case, one of the questions, the expected answer from the inventory is that our relationship is the most important in the family. I'm sort of paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of using language like, is more important than the kids, and I'm paraphrasing a lot there. But it's surprising to people sometimes. I think, well, kids are helpless. Mm-hmm. But no, they need you, and they need a lot, but it is important that couples maintain a little bit of an us first mentality, not to be negligent towards their kids. We never, suggest that. But the idea that a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship between the spouses is going to, by extension, make for a better, healthier family. The kids are going to see that and feel the results of that more so than almost anything else.
I think it's hard when you see families where the kids are the only focus. I think it's hard for children because it puts a lot of pressure on them to be the center of attention, and sometimes that feels really good, but probably many times it feels a little out of control. But also then when they leave, our goal is to raise adults who go out to function in society, and raise their own families or find their own vocations, whatever that is. And so, gosh, then what do I talk to you about when all the kids are gone? Because that's all we've been talking about for 20 years, So
right.
I really think...
then we start a podcast.
Yes, that's right. We have to talk about something. But I think having those activities away from each other, so meaning like I quickly figured out golf was your thing and really never going to be my thing. And that's great. I felt like even when I was staying home, I was often had a book that I was reading, or I would occasionally do some freelance work. And so we talked about that. We talked about your work. We, had conversations that did not just involve what's, this child up to, what's that child up to, how are we going to handle that, but we're broader. What's going on in the world? Let's talk about things that are just remote, remote from us, away from us. What's going on in the community? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great, and I'd love to dive into that in another episode is just, the importance of together and separate time, and how to find balance between those things. So we get married and now we're ready for kids, or, we're starting to do what is done to bring them about.
It's a nice topic.
So we're planning for parenthood, and just to kind of repeat, first off, you're never going to be ready.
No.
You're never going to feel ready. You're never going to have enough money, a big enough house, have, had enough couple time, right? But you'll never be disappointed when they arrive. I think one of the things I realized when we had the twins, and I was being kind of dumb and making stupid jokes about, oh, it's too many kids and this or that. And you kind of called me out on that. And I kind of shook my head. I was like, yeah, that's right. I've never heard any reasonable person say they wish they had fewer kids.
Right.
But I've heard a lot of reasonable people say, I wish I'd had another kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, that got me really excited, right? That, okay, this is not something everybody gets to do. It's a joy.
It is a joy. I mean, it's such a gift it's such a gift. And I think can bring families together. I mean, it was wonderful. It's wonderful to watch now just our moms, since my dad's passed, but, interact with our kids throughout from babyhood to, now adulthood. It's very neat to see their relationships with aunts and uncles and extended family. So, it's fascinating to watch a child grow through stages and become more and more capable of doing different things and learning. It's challenging as all get out. I mean, we can talk about that, again, that's another episode.
Of course, yeah.
But just so worthwhile to have children and to have a family and to learn the lessons we've learned through our children.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I said here too, is be ready for it to be hard.
Yeah.
And be ready for the way that it's hard to change unexpectedly and periodically and consistently. One of the lines we've said often is it doesn't get easier, but it gets different.
That I remember you first saying that when I think Robbie was a baby and I was trying to nurse and trying to figure all this out. And you just said, look, here's what I know. In 2 weeks, it's going to be different. And I said, but it might not be better. And you said, exactly. And I was like, oh no, that's not helpful. But
yeah,
in between the hard times, there's
good,
fabulous times.
Yeah, but there will come a day that you're sitting in the passenger seat with a new driver, and you would give anything to be changing a diaper instead.
Exactly, I knew. A pamper.
Yeah, not a cloth diaper. We did learn from that. We talked about this a little bit, but be ready for kids to come sooner or later than expected.
They're not on a schedule.
Remember, ultimately, we're cooperating in this act of creation, right? So we're just trying to be open to life, and that's difficult to relinquish that control. But it's okay.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then we talked about this, be a team, have a united front, especially as kids start to get older, they're going to start to play both sides against the middle.
Yes.
Right?
You learn that quickly.
One of the most important phrases when your child asks you for something is, what did your dad say? What did your mom say? Just figuring out, have you already gotten an answer and you just didn't like it? And so you're coming and, answer shopping.
Yes, hoping for a different one.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So be united, and don't let the kids, separate you. Even if you maybe disagree with what the other person did in terms of giving out a punishment, stick with them.
Right.
Stick by it. You might have a conversation later on that night. They're like, hey, I think you were a little hard on the beeve. That's an older reference. It's lost on younger viewers. But
right.
But yeah, I think that conversation might need to happen.
Well, I think sometimes that can be hard when I had a different plan for whatever the situation was, but punishment is one of the ones, and that's a whole other show too, but of trying to back up that person. And then, as we've talked about, having that monthly sit down to be able to say, hey, how are we going to handle that? Because I can remember at different ages, the kids being challenging at different points and having to come up with different punishments because the old consequences just didn't work anymore. You can't put a 16-year-old in a timeout on the stairs for 16 minutes.
And be ready to love it.
Yeah.
Be ready to love it. It's a wonderful thing. It's a difficult thing. It's a hard thing. And nothing worth doing is easy.
Right.
So it's great. So we're going to wrap this up here. If you've had thoughts, ideas about kids and about some of these challenges, or if you have ideas for other topics you'd like to hear us talk about, send them to us at terminalvocation@gmail.com. And if you're listening, hey, remember to like, subscribe, follow. It means a lot to us in terms of getting this message and these words out to other people who might just need to hear it. You might need to hear it but they might need to hear it even more. So help us get the word out. You've been listening to Terminal Vocation, a VoFan production. I'm Deacon Mark, along with my wife and co-host Aaron. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.